I'm Kelly McCutchen with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and it is wonderful to see the hundreds of activists out there in the crowd today, because you all are the key to our future. You're the ones that are going to hold our elected officials accountable. What our job is at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation is to give you the ammunition. We're looking at the problems. We're trying to give you the facts and the ideas to take to win those debates, whether it's in the barbershop or the kitchen table or the coffee shop or in the General Assembly. We're trying to be that resource for you. And please, give us a call whenever you can and have a question about anything, state and local or even federal. We have friends like Phil we can connect you with on the federal level. Great to be here today to talk about the state budget. I do think it is an opportunity, like Vanita said. Whenever can we reduce the size of government that we've done in the past few years? It's very difficult for some people, but let's be careful the way we build it back up so we make a better future for our state. I'm a seventh generation Georgian. I want our state to be the best in the country and the opportunities for my children to be the best there are. We've got a great opportunity to do that. When you look at the budget, you need to understand where we've come from and where we're going. And I think we've got to be very careful. There's a lot of Washington terminology that is seeped down into Georgia. You hear in federal deficit, they talk about the baseline budget, which is the amount of spending. They always assume a certain amount of growth. And if you reduce the growth at all, that's a cut. Well, we talked in 2009, they talked about our budget being cut by $3.5 billion. Well, that was not based upon the previous year. That was based on what they had hoped to spend. The reality is more like $2 billion, which is still a significant reduction in revenues, but it was not very intellectually honest to talk about a $3.5 billion reduction. In reality, our revenues in the state of Georgia are down 17% from where they were in 2008 before the recession hit us. That is the same level as where we were around 2005. So that's quite significant. But I think you have to focus on spending. What has happened with spending during that same time period? If you go back to 2005, is our spending back to that level? No. Is our spending, cut 10 or 15%? No. If you compare 2005 spending with where we are in the 2011 budget, 6 years later, that's the budget that starts next year, which is the all doom and gloom, total federal and state spending in the state of Georgia is up 18%. So that's 6 years. That means 3% a year. Now, Phil went to the University of Georgia, I went to Georgia Tech, so I can divide those big numbers and figure that out. So we wanted to have diversity on the panel today. But 3% a year, that's not anything to be ashamed of, particularly in the worst financial crisis in my lifetime. Let me tell you about some other things. They've talked about protecting education spending. Well, they've done that. Education spending is up 28% in those 6 years. Healthcare spending is dramatically up. The Board of Regents spending is dramatically up. Transportation and human resources is down, but all other spending is up 14% in just those few years. So we have not dramatically reduced spending. It has not been easy, but we have had significant spending growth in those 6 years, even though we're in this financial setback. Now, could we have avoided this situation? Absolutely. And what's the problem? The problem is us. Collectively, we didn't hold our elected officials accountable. Now, I believe in limited government, and I suspect that you do too. In fact, that's in our Constitution. And in the state, unfortunately, we don't have a balanced budget amendment at the federal level, but at the state level, you can't spend more than you bring in. But Georgia's a growing state. Our population's been growing, revenues have been coming in many years, we have a tremendous amount of revenue growth. There's nothing in our Constitution that says you can't spend all of that new revenue. But if you went back 20 years, 1989, and said we limited government spending growth to something reasonable like population and inflation, we would end up about where we are today, which is good, but it would be a smooth transition. It would not be the traditional, what we've done in Georgia is we spend like drunken sailors in the good years, and then we have a recession, it screeches to a halt, and we have to make these difficult spending decisions. Those decisions would have been done over those last 20 years. During the good years, you would fill up a rainy day fund, and you'd use that during the bad years. Even better, like they've done in Colorado, if you filled up your rainy day reserve fund and you have even more revenue growth, then you give it back to the taxpayers. That's right. If we had done this over the last 20 years, guess how much money we would have given back to the taxpayers? Nearly $20 billion. That's a lot of money. That's more than we're spending in our state budget, state dollars. That's money that would have gone back into our economy. That is money in the pocketbooks of our families and our entrepreneurs and small businesses that would have grown our economy even more. So let's get back to reality. Unfortunately, we didn't do that 20 years ago. Where are we? Have we cut spending back down to the bone, as many people would have you believe, in education? Now, in the state government, just like federal government, you have restricted funds. You can't do anything with them. Legislators have no discretion over them. The debt, now luckily Georgia's debt is 49th highest per capita in the nation. I don't know who's 50th. We've done a good job of keeping our debt down low. But you've got to pay off the debt. Lottery is off the table. Gas tax funds automatically go to transportation. That's about 20% of our budget. Of the rest, our discretionary spending, 2/3 of that is education. So that's how hard it is when you're trying to protect education. 2/3 of the money they have a chance to do anything with is education. Of that, 1/3 is K through 12 teacher salaries. That's how big a piece of the budget that is. And you've got another slice for corrections and healthcare spending, and that's the majority of our budget. So is this a choice, as some people would have you believe, of we've got to raise taxes, or we're going to have these draconian cuts in spending that are going to leave women and children on the street starving, and all kinds of terrible things are going to happen? Well, that's not the case. It is very tough to do that in the short term, but we have an opportunity now. Going forward, we have lots of opportunities to make government more efficient so we can do more with less, and so we can live within our budget. Let me give you a few benchmarks. It's helpful to understand how you compare to other states. Let's look at teacher salaries. You've heard that we pay our teachers more than anyone above the national average. But the John Locke Foundation every year does a survey of the teacher salaries and adjusts them for cost of living and pension benefits. And they rank those teacher salaries, and guess where we are? Number 1, highest teacher salaries in the country, if you adjust for those factors, which I think are very reasonable. Let's look at education spending. Best thing to do is look at our neighboring states, North Carolina and Florida. Very similar demographics, similar poverty rates, similar minority enrollments. They are killing us in academic achievement. It's a wonderful story what they've done in Florida under Jeb Bush and their K through 12 education. North Carolina has had a lot of gains. They're both doing a lot better than us. So, maybe we need to spend more money. Is that the solution? Well, let's look and see how much they're spending. Well, guess what? They spend less than we do. Florida spends about $700 less than we do per student. North Carolina spends even more, over $1,000 less per student. If you multiply those savings by the 1.5 million students that we have here in Georgia roughly, the savings are anywhere from $1.2 to $1.9 billion a year. Almost $2 billion a year that they're spending. Why can't we do that in Georgia? Another exciting thing, I heard a speaker in October who's an expert in online education. Right now, it's not right for all children, but it's a great opportunity. This expert thinks that online education is going to dramatically improve our education, and it can drive down the cost by a factor of 3. Now, that's not only good for public school students and taxpayers, that's good for private schools, it's good for homeschoolers as well. So that's something that's very exciting that's on the horizon. Higher education. Been a lot of talk about, do we need to cut 4-H? You all know that was just a political ploy. You throw out the Statue of Liberty strategy. Let's put out something that no one really is going to want to cut, and that way they'll leave us alone. I was in 4-H growing up in Gilmer County. Not many people don't realize I won the blue ribbon in how to make a milkshake. Haven't really been able to use that skill, but 4-H was a great experience. They put that up there just to play games, and they shouldn't have been allowed to do that. Yes, there's room to cut spending, but let's look at tuition. The Southern Regional Education Board tracks all the southeastern states, 16 states. Guess where we are? We're 14th out of 16th lowest. Not in the nation, but in the southeast, where tuition is pretty low anyway. That's for our public four-year universities. Now, I think education is critical, and opportunity to education is critical. That's why we believe in school choice. But I don't know if we need to be that good of a bargain. And that's certainly somewhere where we can look at for cost savings. And finally, let's look at the other big budget item, healthcare. You've read about Whole Foods and Safeway and how much money they've saved by providing financial incentives for people to be healthy. And we believe in markets. Prices work, financial incentives work. You lower taxes, people are more productive. Same thing in healthcare. We'd all love to lose some more weight, but you need an incentive. We all need to be more healthier and exercise more, but sometimes it's difficult. At Safeway, they gave their employees incentives to stay healthy, to exercise, to keep their weight below a certain level, to take their medicine so that it can reduce their high blood pressure. If Georgia did this, an actuary looked at the Georgia Employee Benefits Plan and said we could save $1.5 billion a year by just doing what they've done at Safeway and Whole Foods. We need to start doing that right now. We have lots of opportunities to reduce spending without hurting services, and actually we can improve services if we start now. It takes 2, 3, 4 years to get these programs into place. The budget in 2012 is going to be even more difficult to balance than it is this year. So we need to start now, and that gets me to my last point to leave you with. You're the future. I challenge you to get involved in the process. You can have a huge impact on the state level. Just 20 of you writing a letter or calling a state legislator is a big deal. I encourage you to look at your legislators' voting records, hold them accountable for how they vote, not just what they say when they're in their district. Run for office if you're so inclined, and if somebody you know is running for office, get out and support them, because it's not an easy thing to do. And secondly, we as conservatives can't argue for less government unless we have personal responsibility. And that's not just for everybody else. That's for you too. In a civil society, Tocqueville realized this when he came to the United States many years ago, and it's true today. I saw it growing up in North Georgia. We have got to help in our communities and in our churches, because government is going to fill that void if we let it go by. So we need to make sure that we're not just talking the talk, but we get involved in our communities to help other people so that government doesn't have to. So thank you very much for being here. I'd be happy to be a resource to you in the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and look forward to answering your questions. Turn it over to Virginia.